I'm David Liggitt with datacenterHawk. This is Hawk Talk 27 with Jhoan Checo, Senior Vice President at DP Facilities. We're talking about all things data centers, so check it out.
Hey, I'm David Liggitt with datacenterHawk.
Focused on cloud and colocation, data center industry trends, and dynamic market. Tell us about your background and how you got plugged into the data center industry.
Yeah, you could almost say I started in this industry in the late 90s, early 2000s, while active duty Navy.
Okay.
And I was on a fast frigate building and maintaining networks on that boat. And after 4 years, I went to my second tour for the Commander of Naval Forces Europe. And there's where I really started to get my hands on experience in these small computer rooms. Eventually, they started scaling in size, and they're data centers today. We call them data centers today. And then after I got out of the military, I went into the commercial industry here in New York. And 17 years later, after successfully selling and leading teams, I joined DP Facilities as Senior Vice President, and I'm leading the go-to-market strategy, and I'm putting a team together to execute against it.
No, that makes sense. Well, tell us about DP Facilities and this first flagship data center that the company has built in Wise, Virginia. Talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe some of the differentiators that are there for the company, because I know they've worked really hard to do something different than the rest of the data center community today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really goes back to our history and our DNA.
Okay.
So DP has been building critical facilities since the 60s, and it's morphed into this, very cool, innovative solution for not just federal government agencies, but healthcare and financial firms as well. So if you look at our flagship facility in Southwest Virginia, it's actually a great example of an extremely secure, extremely reliable facility that still sits in proximity to the ecosystem that's in Northern Virginia today. So,
and you talked about the different types of users that have found the facility attractive and the solution attractive, government, healthcare, financial firms, and how important are, compliance certifications to companies like that? And the assumed answer is very high, but talk about those companies, how they approach maybe the sensitivity around compliance to the point where they would actually entrust you or other companies with their data center infrastructure.
Absolutely. I mean, you have specific federal certifications and specific healthcare certifications that you must have in order to even get a seat at the table to talk to these companies and be able to house these applications. So compliance is key to a lot of what we do, to everything that we do. And when we look at the different attributes for each certification, and you look at healthcare and federal, they're very different, but they do have similarities. And the fact that we're able to hit on all of them for all those verticals, it makes us a bit unique in the industry to be able to house those type of applications.
And talk about specifically the Mineral Gap facility and what y'all have built there, and what truly makes it different. I mean, obviously this is in Virginia, but it's not in where we see the enormous growth in Northern Virginia has been in Ashburn and different communities surrounding that market. But what have you all built, and what are some of the unique characteristics about the site today that you all find makes it a differentiator?
Well, the one that I like the most, being a veteran, is that it's bunker style.
Okay, sure.
So it's a bunker style campus that you could see anybody coming a mile away, right? But we also put a whole bunch of other features in place. Outside of no-fly zone, K-rated fencing, 24/7, 365 armed guards. These are the type of things you see at an exchange, right? At a financial exchange facility, right? That's the type of security level that we've kind of took as our standard build. We still do your typical biometric card readers and all of that. But what I really, really enjoy is a lot of the counterterrorism and countermeasures that we've put to the perimeter of the facility and all the surveillance we're doing on it. That really sets it apart for me.
Yeah, and there certainly are companies and government groups that have the need for that type of enhanced security. But let's talk about that for a minute, and maybe it's the importance of, and maybe the change in how important security is becoming, not just from the physical perspective, but also from the data side of things. I was, earlier in the week or last week, there was a large financial institution that announced that there was a breach in some of their security with over 100 million users impacted. And unfortunately, that's become more of like a normal announcement almost, if you think about some of the things that have happened over the last couple of years. So it's very clear to me and our team, and I think people in the market, that, hey, not just the physical security, but the data security is very important today. How are you seeing companies approach that? Is that growing in importance from y'all's perspective? And, how does your asset offer, secure measures to them?
And if you look at it historically, you can go back and you can say us, human beings, are the biggest risk to data.
Sure.
Right? And that has never changed, right? You can put in encryption tactics and encryption, out the wazoo, right? You can do whatever you want with artificial intelligence kind of countermeasures, right? But at the end of the day, us human beings are the biggest breach. So a lot of what we hear from our customers and what we do in our build and our designs are based around that, right? So when you look at who should be in this specific part of the room or this specific part of the data center, access control is really big for us. And this is on top of, a lot of the other countermeasures we have in place. Typically, these attacks are people in rooms that they should not be in. And what we try to mitigate is making sure that access to the facility, not just unwanted access from the outside in, but even after you're supposed to be in there, that you're escorted and you're being watched throughout the whole process to make sure that you're touching the physical infrastructure that you're supposed to be touching. So we do take that and we take it very seriously, and we have a lot of mechanisms and things in place to be able to mitigate those type of attacks within our facilities.
Yeah, no, makes sense. When you think about, and it actually is really interesting to see how different data center operators and providers will lead to differentiate themselves. It's very clear you all are differentiating yourselves through security, having a very secure location, secure infrastructure. And some of the other things that we've seen over the last, I would say, several years regarding changes in the space has been around energy use and what types of energy that we're using today and data center operators are using today to power their facilities. And so what's y'all's take on renewable energy and how users today are approaching that from an importance level? Is that important to end users today from an energy perspective, it being from a renewable source?
Yeah, I mean, for us, our sustainability strategy is really not based on the user's perspective. We really just want to be good stewards of the community, the earth, and these markets that we're going into. We're scaling and we're going into a handful of markets in the next few years. So when we go to these markets, sustainability is in our DNA. We're listening to our customers, and they do have a check for this, right?
Sure.
But we're really doing it to be good stewards of the communities that we're going into. I mean, if you look at what we're doing in Southwest Virginia with our solar partners there, Sun Tribe Solar, we're actually building out a 3.5 megawatt solar farm there on an old landmine.
Interesting.
So we're able to take these communities that have gone through a little bit of a tough time, right, with the coal mining communities there, and we're able to retrain them and turn it into a little bit of a positive for them, having work on these projects, having them work in our facilities, retrained as armed guards or operations managers and things like that. So we really look at it as just being good stewards, and sustainability will continue to be part of our strategy as we continue to grow.
So you mentioned you sit in, or your sales office in Northern Virginia, in Ashburn. But obviously you all are, the facilities in a different place. But talk about maybe the benefits of being in that market. You're in that market every day and talking to users and people there. But also you have a solution that's in another place secure. Talk about that and the advantages of being in such a busy data center market today.
Yeah, absolutely. The largest data center market in the world, and being right smack in the middle of it and providing a solution for them to have something, a place to go to should something happen. It's been really, really, really fun for us. I'll tell you a story about my second tour in the UK. I mentioned that I had a security officer that used to like putting things far away, but just far away enough so they could tap into the ecosystem. I see a lot of that in Northern Virginia. I speak to a lot of different companies in all verticals: media, ad tech, financial services, healthcare, obviously government, and they're all telling us the same thing. They're all telling us, listen, Jhoan, this is a great product that you guys have, Can you start replicating this in other places? And this is why it's important to us. And it really comes down to security. It always comes down to security and being able to mitigate some of these risks and these data breaches that are happening all the time. So when we speak to our customers and we speak to some of our prospects in Northern Virginia, they're all saying the same thing. If you can have a solution for us where we can still tap into this ecosystem, but being that bunker style solution that you guys have, that's perfect for us. And that's really what's driving our growth into Ohio, what's driving our growth into these other markets. It's all based on our customers telling us this is where we want you to go because we want you to sit outside of these ecosystems and still give us a solution to get to that.
Yeah, interesting. So you've talked about, or you've been in the space for 20 plus years. If you think about your military experience and what you were doing, back in the early 2000s, when you think about one of the words that or terms that we hear a lot in the space today is hybrid colo, and this mix of both cloud and colocation and companies evaluating a more strategic approach to their infrastructure. How are you seeing that today? I mean, you've been in the space for a long time. You've worked with numbers of different companies over the last 20 plus years. How are you seeing companies approach that hybrid strategy today?
Yeah, hybrid to me is pretty black and white. There's applications that are legacy, and they're just not going to be able to move on to a virtualized cloud environment, a multi-tenant environment, just through the sheer nature of who needs to have access to it or the data that's actually there. And then there's applications that can absolutely be virtualized and be completely moved over to the cloud. So to me, I see hybrid being kind of the standard strategy in our industry. Yeah. Where if you and I were to start our own data center company today, we would have to take hybrid into account wherever we go. And we'll have to take it into account in how we design and build. Yeah. So if you think back a few years ago, probably in the early 2000s, we were all building these facilities, and I would always say, well, we don't build islands for a living. We have to have access to the world. So we would always have as many carriers as we wanted inside of these facilities. Now, with hybrid, now you start looking at software-defined networks and companies like Megaport, and you have to have them in your facility. So we just recently completed our Megaport partnership, and now our customers have access to over 300 carrier networks, and we want to enable hybrid. One of the other things I see happening with hybrid is I think they'll actually start morphing our industry into being more transparent on the mechanical and electrical part of what we do. And I think that with software, you can absolutely achieve that. And I think if we give that transparency to our customers, they'll start being able to be better prepared to all the data that's going to be coming at us in the next 5 years.
Yeah. So you mentioned how some companies with their legacy applications, it's hard for them to take those and put them anywhere else. And then you also were talking about companies that maybe have something new they're adding in, and that the cloud infrastructure piece does make sense for that. I'm interested, what are the challenges you see those companies have to go through to make some of those decisions and pull the trigger on how to actually push those applications forward, either into cloud or into a co-location environment? What are some of the challenges you see companies face when they're working through that analysis?
A lot of the challenges that I hear, CTOs and some of these CXOs that are involved with these decisions is based on the ease of portability and the access to the data. And then the other portion that I look at is time sensitivity. Okay. Right? Because there is a component of latency when you have applications running in the cloud. Of course. So when you think of those three components, those are the three challenges that I hear CXOs talking about a lot. What's going to be the portability strategy? And again, this is taking a step back and them actually doing a lot of research and working very closely with their teams on what kind of data is going to be living in these applications, who's going to have access to it. Does it even make sense to have this in a cloud environment? Once all that due diligence is done, it really comes down to these three things that I continue to hear, which is portability, how do we get it there? Accessibility, how are our users going to access it? And then latency. Sure. Latency becomes a big component. For example, financial services. I came up through financial services in this industry. And I remember a guy saying, trading applications are never going to be able to live on the cloud because you have to trade in nanoseconds. That's a fact.
Yep.
That's a good example of an application that cannot actually live on a cloud because it has to be sitting next to a matching engine to trade, right? So you still have that latency component transition into other verticals.
Yep.
So I do see those three decisions being tough decisions for those CXLs.
Sure, and I think too. I mean, you talked about the financial industry specifically, but I think I know one thing we've really enjoyed or studying and focusing on is how the different industry verticals are seeing that and their approach. Because you brought up a very good example of how important like latency is related to the financial industry, and there's very important characteristics that are demand drivers that the healthcare industry would bring to the table, technology companies would bring to the table, retail companies would bring to the table. And so it's really, I think it's been fascinating for us over the last, 24 months to see how these companies are really approaching their infrastructure. We just did a podcast on AI and how AI is set to, there's some development with AI that's set to restructure some of the retail industry or the technology industry. And so I always am interested in how the industry verticals are changing based off of what technology can do for them today and what are some of the limitations based off of things like compliance or security or, latency issues, et cetera. So very good point. Okay, you mentioned at a high level some of your expansion ideas and thoughts at this point, but talk from your perspective, how does the DP Facilities team approach their expansion down the road? What's the plan at a high level for the company?
Super exciting time for us from an expansion perspective. We just press released our entry into the Ohio market. We're actually going to be building our bunker style campus right outside of the Columbus market in the Long Ridge terminal, where the Long Ridge terminal plant was.
Okay.
And what that's going to yield us is 485 megawatts of power that we're going to be able to use in a sustainability kind of way in the campus. And this is in addition to the dual substations and everything else that's going to be coming into the campus. And then we're also going to be able to be very flexible because of the amount of power we're going to be able to bring into the campus on some other products that are going to be lending themselves very well to the commercial sector as well. Yeah. Not just the government and federal agencies that want us to be there. So look for us to come out with a lot more information on Ohio.
Okay, cool.
And then I mentioned earlier we did our press release for our Sun Tribe Solar project, which is going to yield us 3.5 megawatts into our Southwest Virginia campus. Again, tying into our strategy with sustainability. And most recently, we also did our Megaport press release, enabling our customers to over 300 carriers over their SDN network. Some of the other markets we're going to be going into, and we're very, very excited about, are Reno, Austin here in Texas. We're looking at Denver, and we're looking at Salt Lake City as well.
Okay, very cool. I think you hit on a trend that we've seen from the data center operator community over the last 2 to 3 years, which has really been increasing the services that they provide end users to create a better experience. I think it speaks to the fact that the data center user community is pushing data center operators to do more for them. And I think the data center operator community has responded well to that. The other thing that you mentioned, the Ohio market in Columbus. Previously, before we started datacenterHawk, I remember we would be approaching companies, and I was always surprised in a good way at how many were actually headquartered in Columbus. I mean, there's a very large business density in that market, and it's one of the reasons that you're starting to see co-location activity there. There's some very large data center users themselves that have made their home or a home, right around that market in areas like New Albany and Dublin and Hilliard. And so it's just that market, I think, is a fascinating market, and it'll be really fun like 5 years from now to see how much growth has taken place in that area, because I think that's a really smart place to be. Well, we talked about 5 years from now, but if we think about the future and the rest of the year, we're at the midway point right now. It's extremely hot in Texas, which I apologize that you have had to endure the 110-degree weather heat, but that means we're in the middle of the year here.
The humidity part is brutal. It's brutal.
Yes. But, talk to us about what you think the rest of the year will be like in the data center industry. and maybe the next couple of years, some of maybe the trends that you and your team see as coming down the road?
So, spending a lot of time on a plane, you do a lot of reading.
Yeah. Yes.
I was reading an article from Synergy Research Group, and they said in their article that in 2018, the hyperscale data centers ballooned to 430. And this year, it has already grown 11%. And the guys that are blazing that trail are Google and Amazon, right? And then a few weeks ago, IDC came out with a pretty cool statistic of, we're in 2019, the data that we're using, manipulating, leveraging, and just getting out to the world, it's at 40 zettabytes. And in 5 years, it's going to be at 175 zettabytes. So, when you start looking at what a zettabyte is, first of all, which is 1 trillion gigabytes, that's a lot of data. Yep. So when I look at the future and even the second half of this year and even just the future of this industry, I think that you're going to start seeing providers that are going to have to build quick enough to be able to house this data.
Yep.
And those providers are the ones that you're going to start seeing being the more successful ones that are going to be executing on all this data that's coming right at us in the next 5 years.
Yeah. Well, Jhoan, thank you so much for your perspective, and really excited to see what DP Facilities is doing, and it'd be fun to watch the Mineral Gap facility continue to grow, and we always appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having us, and as you know, it's the safest place on earth. You got to come check it out.
You bet. Thanks, man.